Hi, it's Jim Zogby. Welcome to Viewpoint. Well, Super Tuesday's primary contest produced two clear frontrunners. On the Republican side, Donald Trump racked up wins in 7 states compared to 3 for Ted Cruz and 1 for Marco Rubio. Hillary Clinton defeated Bernie Sanders in 7 out of the 11 Democratic contests, Bernie winning 4 rather handily. For analysis of the results and some future predictions, I want to welcome to the show Bob Borosage. He's founder and president of the Institute for America's Future and co-director of the Campaign for America's Future. He's a contributing editor at The Nation magazine and co-author of 2 books, Taking Back America and The Next Agenda. Thanks for joining us, Bob.
My pleasure.
Before we get into the contests themselves, I want to sort of see how we got here. I mean, what defines the political landscape that produces the situation that we're in, where a 74-year-old
rock star.
I mean, you say rock star, but that's part of the issue. I mean, how the hell does a 74-year-old grumpy guy from Vermont become a rock star in this environment and give Hillary Clinton, who was the First Lady, Secretary of State, 2-term senator, give her a run for her money, quite literally run for her money. And then on the Republican side, how do you end up with a sort of a almost clown type character? I mean, and I use that also quite literally. Reality TV show guy, simply dispatching governors across the board and other candidates that the establishment. First, on the Democratic side, how do you explain the Sanders phenomenon? What accounts for the dynamism?
Let's look at them both at the same time a little bit. At the beginning of this race, this was going to be a Clinton-Bush race, Jeb Bush from Florida, right? The 2 dynasties. And they both were going to raise all the money and did. They were going to get all the establishment endorsements and did. They were going to have all the deep pocket donors and they got them. And the expectation was both of them would roll through and then they'd have an establishment fight for who was going to be the president. In both parties, that expectation was blown up. And it was blown up because this economy doesn't work for most people and there's an enormous amount of anger about it. You know, with the 2008 collapse, for the first time, I think we've had stagnant incomes for working people for a very long time. Really no gain a dollar since 19.
Can I just put this up? We have a screen that shows this. Here you go. Average household income for the top 5% since 1970, and here's the bottom fourth, the absolute bottom third, and all the way down to.
So this is 80% of the country basically having stagnant household income.
Right.
And then in 2008, with the financial collapse, you had people's wealth wiped out because many people lost their homes, and that is the basic source of working class and middle class wealth. For African Americans, their wealth was cut by 80% on average. So that collapse then, I think, sharpened people's minds because they saw the bailout. And the bailout bailed out the banks. They bailed out these guys at the top and did nothing for homeowners. And since 2008, the top 1% has captured virtually all of the rewards of growth in this society, even though we've had decent growth, we've had declining unemployment, wages have still been stagnant, and household incomes haven't recovered to where they were before the collapse. So there's a great deal of anger and disappointment on both sides of the spectrum. And it kind of erupted in both parties, and Sanders in the Democratic Party and Trump, particularly in the Republican Party, became the expression of that. And what's interesting about both of them is both of them present themselves to the public as independent of the old establishment. So Sanders is funding his campaign with small donations raised over the web. And a central part of his theme, of course, is that our politics is corrupted by big money and our economy is rigged by those same interests, so it doesn't work for you. And he has legitimacy in talking about that because of the way he's funding his campaign. On the Republican side, Trump is the billionaire, right? He's self-funding his campaign. So he says to Republicans, these guys are all corrupt. I've been in that business. I've given money to politicians. They're bought and sold. I'm independent. I'll tell you the real truth. So both of them initially established their independence and their credibility as messengers. And then both of them went after what has been the bipartisan center of a failed economic policy. Trump going after trade, Bernie going after trade, and the big banks, and the way that the system had gotten rigged. And so there's kind of parallels on both sides that are fascinating. Now, there's huge differences, obviously. Trump has played the Republican Party's racial politics perfectly. So Republicans built their base of working people as a party of white inclusion based in the South. Mm-hmm. And they did it with dog whistle politics. First they did it kind of racially in the early years. And then it was cut welfare, which meant black people, cut spending, which meant black people. So Trump has done build the wall.
Willie Horton, welfare queens, all of the dog whistle terms.
Right. So Trump has done build the wall. Mexicans are sending their rapists to us. Keep Muslims out, right? Don't let them in ever, because we don't know they're all terrorists. So it's perfect dog whistle racist politics, which appeals to a very hard-pressed voting base in the Republican Party that has been built over years. It's not that he can tap into.
And certainly since the Obama election took on a different hue, because they combined the collapse with a black president to sort of fuse together those racial themes with anger at the the other. And
the entire party is blame Obama 24/7. Right?
Yeah.
And that's also kind of very much a racial thing. And of course, Trump played that even earlier when he did the birther stuff about Obama, that he really was born in Kenya and shouldn't have been president, and kept that going, throughout. It kind of established his name in conservative circles as this nutcase doing this. Sanders, on the other hand, was a surprise, I think, to everybody, including himself, that this democratic socialist, laying out, what's really a common sense, but a very ambitious plan for Medicare for all, tuition-free university, investing and rebuilding our economy, taking on climate change, and taxing the wealthy to pay for it, that he became a rock star among the young. In all of these primaries on Super Tuesday, he's winning young voters overwhelmingly. In Iowa and New Hampshire, he won them 84-12, 29-year-olds and younger. So he's become a phenomena among the young as somebody who's talking about big ideas meeting big problems that they're inheriting.
I wonder on both sides if there's sort of an issue or a dynamic behind the issues that plays out. In the case of Trump, it reminds me a bit almost of WWE. The sense is that you're watching, and I look at the crowds, and they look like the same crowd. Mm-hmm. It's a fake, it's a hoax, but it sort of is a visceral playing. It's like an id unrestrained. It's like it says everything I want to hear and gets my juices flowing, even though I know it's a charade. And on the Democratic side, with Bernie, I wonder how much people are understanding or committed to the socialist vision or the idea he has about what's wrong and how it's wrong, as much as it is that he just seems like somebody they can trust and believe, and that the trustworthiness versus the lack of trust is what plays out there. I mean, comment on both of those.
I think both of that's right. Trump, on his polling, the highest quality he has is he tells it like it is. So they believe that he's telling it like it is. He's saying things they want to say, right? Just
let me put this up for a minute. On the honesty of presidential candidates, Hillary comes out last. Bernie comes out first. Of all the candidates. This is a poll that just came out this week.
Right, and Sanders ranks very high as honest and having integrity, because clearly he does.
How the hell do you end up with a matchup that places two people that are the least trusted politicians Now, granted, this is Democrats not trusting him, and this is
Right.
Republicans and Democrats not trusting her. But that's a shocking situation that they're even sometimes presidents, after they win, their favorable numbers go down. These two folks start the campaign with favorable numbers no higher than the low 30s,
Right.
and trust numbers in the 20s.
Right. Well, Trump is doing it as an insurgent. Hillary's doing it as the establishment.
Yeah, that's right.
And Hillary's been saved, ironically, in my view, by massive African-American votes in the South. And that's partly from a long association of Hillary and her husband with African-Americans. It's partly because every gatekeeper in the African-American community went with the establishment candidate early and locked it up. And it's partly because Sanders came out of Vermont, which is a white state, and didn't have the association. So he had to introduce himself to people.
I want to just a detour again on the African-American Clinton relationship. Because I remember, and I know you do quite intimately, 96, the Democratic Convention, when Reverend Jackson, rather, at that point, still the spokesperson for African Americans, was really quite upset with the welfare reform and budget cuts that came during the Clinton era. Has that all been forgotten?
I think,
or is it forgiven?
I think in the South, certainly, for African Americans, there's some memory of the last part of the Clinton economy, which was the only time when unemployment got down in the African American community to close to what white unemployment rates are, and the only time when incomes rose at the bottom in 30 years. And many of the effects of the Clinton reforms that were brutal didn't really play out until later under Bush. So the welfare reform became brutal when we had the recession, and we left millions of people in abject poverty because there's no kind of floor under them. The mass incarceration that Clinton championed played out over years, and now we're left with this horror where we've destroyed a good portion of a generation of young African American, particularly African American men, for nonviolent crimes, possession of
1/3
crack,
of
et cetera.
African American males under the age of 39 are either in prison,
On parole.
on probation, or in jail waiting for a trial. And the average length of getting your trial is 22 months.
And then the biggest legacy of Clinton, I think, is not associated with him at all in the African American community, which is the NAFTA China deals, the globalization that Clinton really set up, devastated American manufacturing, and that was the basic ladder for a significant portion of the African American community to get into the middle class. And when those jobs were lost, and they were lost in large numbers, it was much harder for poor blacks to find their way up into it.
So Super Tuesday, Hillary had a good night.
Well, she had a good night here's the other irony. Hillary won the states that Democrats have no chance of winning in the general election. That is, she won across the South. And she won across the South because the voters in the Democratic side were predominantly African American or significantly African American, and she won those overwhelmingly. Sanders won the states and has done well or won close in the states that are outside that are the states that Democrats win, the blue states or the swing states. He lost I think the key loss for Sanders was Massachusetts. If he had won Massachusetts and he lost it by a percentage point, we would have been telling a different story coming out of Super Tuesday. Because it would have shown that he had a real trajectory as we head north, which is the next round of.
And Virginia was a
primaries.
problem too, I guess.
Yeah, although Virginia again was less, I think, more of a swing state, more.
In the western part of the state, the Appalachian part
Right.
of the state, he didn't do so well.
He didn't do as well as he'd hoped.
Yeah. The big ones coming up are going to be in Michigan and Ohio in particular.
Illinois.
But Illinois, Pennsylvania, states like that he has to perform in. The pundits have written him off. They never wrote him in, but now they've written him off.
Right.
Is it premature, or do you think that what we've got right now is a protest campaign running through to the convention to raise critical issues? Where would you assess where you are right now?
Well, it's a very hard path to win now because these states are all proportional.
Yeah.
That is, you split the delegates on the basis of the percentage of the vote you get in each primary. So he has to win the primaries big to come back. And so if he wins many states and Hillary runs close, he's still got a hard time winning the nomination in terms of total delegates. We saw that in 2008 with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton when she won a bunch of states, but the votes were all close, and the early lead that Obama had created was hard to overcome. So it's hard for Sanders. It's possible still. And what I think the pundits don't get really is Sanders is just introducing himself to people. People don't pay attention to this stuff. And so he's still on an upward trend in terms of his support and in terms of his reach into the Latino community, into the Black community particularly, which he hasn't had long ties with. Hillary, everybody knows. She has universal name recognition, and as your chart showed, very high unfavorabilities, and among Democrats is seen as untrustworthy. And so she's sort of where she is. She's not going to get
Here's a question I
stronger.
have. There was a Democratic coalition at one point, and Obama redefined that coalition into a winning coalition that included the three principal minority groups, young people, and also professional women. What we have found is that while Secretary Clinton can keep part of that coalition, Bernie has the other part, in particular young people who have voted for him almost a 70% margin, 70-point margin. Not unlike the trustworthy one, young people come in that same group.
Right.
The question I have is, does it convey after it's over? If he wins, does he pick up her support base? If she wins, can he pick up?
Can she pick up?
Can
his
she
support?
pick up his support base? And that confounds me. Just like on the Republican side, which we'll get to, I'm not sure that the establishment crowd goes to Trump. I'm not sure that the counter-establishment crowd from Bernie Sanders go to Hillary Clinton.
Well, we've seen, the divisions on the Democratic side are not nearly as bitter, obviously, as the divisions on the Republican side. And so patching the party together is much less difficult on the Democratic side. The harder question is enthusiasm, particularly for young people, but not just for young people. We've had lower turnout in all of these primaries on the Democratic side than we had in 2008, and than Republicans are having in general this year. And so the question is, if Hillary wins the nomination, which seems likely now, Sanders endorses, carries on the fight, carries on his cause, will people come out in large numbers for Hillary, or will they be disaffected because she is seen with high unfavorabilities, high lack of trustworthiness? She's in Trump or whoever the nominee on the Republican side will have infinite material to do negative politics.
Let's take a look at one board that was up a second ago. I want to put it back up, and that's the presidential matchups. What's been consistent from the beginning is that Sanders beats the top Republicans by much larger number. In fact, Hillary loses to Cruz and loses to Rubio, only beats Trump by a much less significant margin than Bernie beats by 12, she beats by 5, and she doesn't break 50 against anybody. That's the conveying issue. It's just, it doesn't seem to come over.
Yeah, and it's the high unfavorabilities.
Yeah.
Universal name recognition and very unpopular in many ways.
Let's
The other problem with this is that a Clinton-Trump race will be an utterly negative race on both sides.
Yeah.
She will attack him, her campaign will attack him mercilessly for any range of things, from racism to his business practices to his sexism, et cetera. He will attack her, and he's very good at it, as we've seen on the Republican side, on any range of things.
any range of issues, yeah.
And negative campaigns drive turnout down.
Yeah.
Now, Hillary, people on the right hate Hillary almost as much as they hate Obama. And so she will mobilize people and mobilize Republicans, just her candidacy to beat her. And I think Trump will pose a significant enough threat to Democrats and to young people that he may well help her mobilize people.
This is probably an election where people will wear a button saying who they're voting against.
Exactly.
Right. Let's go over to the Republican side. The establishment is hysterical right now. Romney came today with a blistering attack on Trump. Sounded almost like the John Oliver piece, without the humor, the same content. I think that they must have gotten the content from the same, the Romney people must have been looking at the Oliver piece and just sort of toned it down a bit. If he is the nominee, what do they do?
Well, the neoconservatives, the hawkish part of the party, have said they're going to run a third candidate, and a third-party candidate. The party, I think, will have the Republican Party, very hard time rallying behind Trump. But already Fox TV has abandoned Rubio and said we've got to get over here and start making peace with Trump if he's going to be our nominee. And so I think there will be, at the end of the day, if he actually gets the nomination, there will be an attempt to patch it together. They're they have a decent chance of getting into a convention fight where the nominee doesn't have enough delegates going into the convention. I mean, if Trump wins Florida and Ohio, those are two states where the winner takes all of the delegates. If he wins those two, he'll be the nominee. That's on March 15th. If he doesn't win those two, if Rubio does Florida, his home state, and Kasich wins Ohio, his home state, then most of the other states are states that are proportional again. And it gets more and more likely that you could have a convention where he doesn't have enough votes in the convention to win the nomination. And that will be a Donnybrook.
Let's just back up just 1 minute, because what intrigues me about this, I compare this to the last round, where there were two serious candidates in the Republican race. John Huntsman, who was dispatched rather quickly after the first
With no votes,
after
right.
New Hampshire, but he did well in New Hampshire. He just didn't go anywhere. And Mitt Romney. The rest were clowns, and frankly were one after another in the lead until finally the establishment was able to galvanize around Romney, and they were able to bring that support to heel. It got out of control this time. The serious folks, the governors, Kasich is nowhere to be found. Bush had to leave,
gone.
and Christie ended up not going anywhere and now endorsing Trump. And what you're left with is not just Trump, but you're left with Cruz, which for the establishment is like pick your poison.
Right.
And Rubio, who's clearly not ready for prime time.
Who's an empty suit, right.
Yeah, an empty suit who's now doing comedy routines.
Right.
It's not the GO. This is not the party of George Herbert Walker Bush or Jim Baker, or you could go down the line.
Right, but it shouldn't be. I think it's really important for people to understand how angry people are. This thing doesn't work for them. This political economy does not work for most Americans, and they've formed their politics sometimes around race and around choice and around other questions. They've formed their politics around trade and basic issues, but it doesn't work. And so when you present an establishment candidate, that person starts out not with an advantage, but with a disadvantage. And that's true to a lesser extent on the Democratic side. And a lot of that is because you've got a very loyal African-American community to Barack Obama, the first black president. They've had his back, understandably, even though his policies haven't helped that community much through his presidency. And so they are much less in revolt than you see on the Republican side among the white, particularly non-college educated voters. But but there's this kind of sense that I don't understand why they don't like good candidates from the establishment who are dressed up and have all the credentials. Well, it's exactly those credentials that haven't worked for them, so they have every good reason not to like them.
You noted in the beginning that the GOP has sort of broadened its base, not only using race, but also using coded social issue messages, mostly abortion and gay rights, et cetera. They were warned by the party chair to drop those issues. I don't think anybody expected that Trump would then be the beneficiary, somebody who is in no way a conservative. And I think the conservatives who are having their convention this weekend here in town are having a conniption over it. But they did attract people in whose economic interest it wasn't correct to be a Republican. I want to put up a quote from Bill Bennett, who was in the paper today, saying when asked about the Republican establishment going after Trump, he said, "We've been trying to get white working class people into the party a long time. Now they're here in large numbers because of Trump, and we're going to alienate them? I don't get it. Too many people are on their high horse." Almost a sort of a very blatant acknowledgement that they've been trying to lure working class people into the party using the social issues, and now they're getting them in based on what? Anger and outrage at the establishment?
And social issues. The wall, ban Muslims.
Okay, right. Two different social issues than the...
But all racially coded.
Yeah.
It's the same appeal.
Intriguing, I think.
Well, I think white working class, particularly in the South, have been moving into that party for a long time. That was the Nixon strategy, and it
they made the transition from Nixon to George Wallace and then back.
Right, and so they've been consolidating that. They brought in the evangelical community, which consolidated it further, and so this is the kind of final expression of that. What I think where it got hijacked by Trump was these people also are angry about what's going on with them economically, and nobody delivered on the social issues. In fact, the country's gotten more and more liberal socially. They elected a Republican Congress, they elected a Republican Senate, and they didn't stop gay marriage, they didn't stop all the things that they were kind of fed, the red meat they were fed that they claimed they would stop. And so now this is the revolt. Trump saying, I can get things done, and I'm going to build a wall, and I'm going to stop these guys from coming in. And
it's going to be a huge wall.
Yeah. And the Mexicans are going to pay for it.
One quick thing, and then we're out of time. What do you expect in the next couple of weeks?
I think you're going to see Sanders do better than expected in the primaries going forward. I think I keep waiting for the Republican establishment and this overwhelming assault to begin to erode Trump's support.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that you're totally bulletproof, but thus far he has, and that's the test we're going to see. And I'll tell you, if he beats Rubio in Florida and Kasich in Ohio, this thing's over on their side.
Thanks for joining me, Bob.
Pleasure.
That's all the time we've got. You can follow us on Twitter at AAIUSA or on our website, aaiusa.org. That's all the time we've got, and I'll see you next week on Viewpoint.